Hello there, and welcome to Beyond the Surface, where the saying to be seen is to be understood comes to life. I want to begin by first honouring the traditional custodians of the land we live and work on. I live and work on Gundungurra land, and I acknowledge the traditional landowners of my guests near and far. I pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging, for they hold the memories, the traditions, and cultures of our First Nations people. The land below my feet is, was, and always will be Aboriginal land. I'm no stranger to the profound journey of pain, grief, anger, and heartbreak that often accompanies the loss of church, community, faith, and the unwinding of our core beliefs. In the midst of this, though, I found healing in the stories shared by others who walked a similar path to me. Here in the warmth of these digital walls, I want you to feel at home. This is a space where your memories and your story is not just acknowledged, but deeply seen and believed. So kick back, relax, and let's embark on a journey where your story is not just heard, but embraced. I want to welcome you to a community where storytelling is a powerful force. This is Beyond the Surface. Welcome, Alanah. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
I love your Instagram and I will get into it in a little bit, but I love it because if people don't know, you do at the moment, you've been sort of reworking some Christian worship songs into more inclusive, wholesome language. And worship was a big part of my story. And I
Okay.
found you from the oceans cover that you did.
Yeah.
And I noticed even like just hearing the music, I was like, oh, this is interesting. It brings up a weird reaction.
Yeah.
What has it been like for you?
Yeah. So it's been kind of a wild ride. I posted the first ever video almost a year ago now. It was like the end of February 2023. I was like in the middle of kind of a period of depression and when I was in the evangelical church, what I would do to get myself out of that headspace was sit at the piano and play like worship songs. And that always helped. And nothing else could really help in the way that that did. So, having left the church in 2020, it had been a couple of years at that point, and I was like, what do I do? And so, like, I tried to sit down and start playing some worship songs to try to just like get my body out of it, like I used to. But like the cognitive dissonance, I couldn't ignore it. Dissonance. And so I just like got really angry and stormed away from my piano. And then I was like, what if I just like sang my own words? And so I sat down and I started singing the melody of Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing, but with different lyrics on top. And immediately I felt like this shift in me, almost physiologically. And I was like, this is it. Like, so I sang through like the whole first verse. I kind of just like wrote it on the spot. It kind of just came to me. Um, and I felt a lot lighter, just like I did back when I used to sing worship music over myself. And so I posted it, and then that went viral on TikTok. And I was like, okay, like this is not just helping me, it's helping a
Yeah.
bunch of other people. And so I started rewriting more and more different hymns, and then I started to dabble in modern worship songs.
Mm.
Oceans being the latest one. I actually had to take it down because of copyright issues, but I'm
Yeah.
working on trying to work around that. Especially for like my Patreon members. But
Yeah.
that's like a whole nother story. But yeah, so it's been a really, really cool little year-long journey so far. And I'm really, really thankful.
Yeah. Okay. So where does your story start?
Yeah. So I was raised in the church. It was a Nazarene church that we went to. Though they were more of like non-denominational.
Hmm.
Um, they called themselves Nazarene, but the actual like day-to-day practice of it wasn't quite as legalistic as like a traditional Nazarene church. But my parents sent me to a private Christian school through the church that we went to, and that was pretty legalistic. So I grew up like wearing a uniform to school every day, and We would have prayer time every morning. I was always getting in trouble for dumb stuff because, they were just never happy.
Yeah.
So it was pretty rigid at school, but like at home and at like normal church, I actually really enjoyed religion, and I
Mm,
seemed to really like excel and fit in pretty well because I was good at like climbing the ladder and like getting on people's good side. Um, and I also played piano from I think I had my first piano lesson when I was 4. So that's been a part of my life my entire childhood. Yeah.
yeah.
Um, so of course I utilized that in church and school, pretty much from the moment that I could. Like I joined the youth group band when I turned 13, and I pretty quickly went on to play in quote unquote big church. So like the adult services when I was in high school, stuff like that. And I started interning there with the worship pastor because I wanted to be a worship pastor one day.
Mm,
Um, and that's when I started producing music because they needed help like with background tracks and stuff for the band to play along with. So it was really fun and really enjoyable, and I made a lot of friends. It was like a great community. So it just like cemented in me this desire to keep pursuing that as like a career.
mm,
So I, after high school, attended a conference on the other side of the state of Michigan where I grew up, um, at this like bigger mega church, and it was pretty charismatic. And being like a pretty emotional person myself, especially as like a creative musician, I was like captivated. I was like,
yeah.
this very emotional worship is like amazing.
Yeah.
Um, and they announced that they had a worship school, and only like 20 people got in every year, and I was like there's no way I'm going to get in, but I applied anyway and I got in. So
Wow.
I moved across the state back in 2018, and then it was like a year-long program. It was very intense, lots of like retreats, and like some of our assignments were like to prophesy over each other and stuff. um,
Wow.
yeah, it was incredibly intense. And then at the end of that year, I volunteered with the next year's school, and then I ended up joining that church's staff, like as an actual like paid staff member.
Mm,
Um, and then that's kind of when things started to unravel for me. So
right.
as far as background goes, that brings us up to the
Mm,
point of like deconstruction.
okay. And so was your family religious?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, they didn't grow up religious. I think they were kind of forced into like Catholic school
Mm,
when they were super young, but pretty much from the time they moved out of their parents' house, they kind of rejected all that and then came back to it once they got married and found out they were pregnant with me. To my knowledge, that's the story.
okay. And so what do you remember about being young and being a part of the church?
I thought it was super fun because we had like all these fun like children's church activities and
Mhm.
stuff, and I had all my friends there, and I thought that church was like the best part of the week because of that.
Yeah.
I specifically remember on Sundays, they like redid the children's church area at one point. I think I was in like 5th grade when this happened, and part of the main area that we all met got like sectioned off, and there were like video game consoles in there so that when we weren't in like teaching time or music time, we could go hang out and play like SpongeBob games on the GameCube and stuff.
Ah, that's
So
great.
I just like I would look forward to that every week,
Yeah.
and it was just super fun. And I accepted all of the teachings. I was like, yeah, that's the truth. Like I had no other frame of reference because I just grew up in it day one. So I was like, yeah, Jesus died for me.
Mm,
Um, and like going to a Christian school, I had no friends who shared a different or like who held a different view. All my friends shared the same worldview as me. So I it felt all very cohesive, um,
yeah.
and very like, I don't know, just right. But at the same time, I also felt like I didn't fit in and I was having to very much pretend all the time. But being so young, I didn't really know that that wasn't normal. I
Mm,
thought that everybody had to pretend all the
yeah.
time.
Yeah.
And like in hindsight, I am queer. That wasn't okay back then. And I think that I like always have been.
Mm,
So I look back on like young Alanah, trying so hard to fit in, and I'm like, you were never meant for that environment. Like it's okay.
yeah. Yeah. Do you remember having any explicit teachings around anything that wasn't in, I guess, a heteronormative picture, or was it just sort of assumed?
It was just assumed.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I was never introduced to any other language even for it until after high school. Like
Okay.
it was just like whispers up
Mm,
until then. Um, and I don't even remember paying much attention to it if I ever did hear about it.
yeah. What was your personal relationship with God like?
I had a very close relationship with God. Um, I remember genuinely enjoying like my daily journal time. And when I went to the worship school, one of the things we were taught is how to like specifically listen for the voice of God. And so we would do like these special journal times where you would write something to God and then you would write out what you hear him saying back to you.
Mm,
So it was like very conversational, which ended up being actually like really cool. I kind of wish it was like under the supervision of a licensed therapist because it felt a lot like what now feels like internal family systems, which I'm
yeah.
going through right now with my therapist, like talking with different parts of you.
Mm,
Um, I essentially look back on that and see that that's what I was doing at the time because I did heal from certain things at the time, especially like childhood wounds and stuff, started to come up during those journal times. And I
mm,
like made peace with a couple of them before I even knew what like therapy was. Um, so stuff like that. I viewed my relationship with God in a very like conversational way. And I started writing music from that place. And actually before I even started deconstructing, I wrote a little EP of songs that were sung from God's perspective, like God singing to
oh,
you, and
wow.
they're all like really like kind language, which I think if you showed to a lot of fundamentalists now, they would be like, that's not that's heresy, you know.
They probably would, yeah.
Yeah, like I remember my dad being a little bit like um but
Mm,
yeah, so it was really kind of a sweet relationship, looking back on it.
mm,
um and that's been an interesting part of my deconstruction, is kind of making peace with that, like honoring myself back then. Like
mm,
I didn't know what I know now. I was doing the best I could with the knowledge I had and the upbringing that I had and the environment I was in. And
yeah.
so I never want to look back on past Alanah and be like, that's so dumb that you thought you were talking to God. Like,
Mm,
that's stupid, because like it was real to me then. And that means it was real to me.
yeah. Yeah.
So
It's a really delicate balance, isn't it?
yeah,
Because I often I will look back on past versions of me and cringe and be mortified at, the rigidity and the black and whiteness and all of that. But the reality is that without her, I wouldn't be the me now. And
yeah,
so she might have been a bit of a shit show, but she's who brought me here. And so it doesn't help anybody to start, sledging past versions of ourselves.
yeah,
But it's tough. Yeah.
yeah, it is.
Um, okay, tell me, I am dying to hear about worship school and how prophetic stuff was assessments and how that just is
Yeah.
baffling to me. So what was that year like?
So gosh, it was my first time living outside of my parents' house. So I experienced like that independence for the first time, which was very fun.
Mm,
Um, I met some pretty cool people, got connected with some like quote unquote church famous people. So I felt like I was on top of the world. Um, it was it was more revealing very quickly than I ever thought it would be. Like I had to be very vulnerable very fast with people I didn't know very well, in a lot of different ways. Like our very first day of orientation, we like were sat down in a room and were basically explained like, hey, these are all your teachers, these are all the classes you're going to take, like a typical orientation. And then we went straight to like a night of worship service, and everyone was crowded around me in the front because all the students were supposed to be up in the front. Everybody was like shouting in tongues, which I had never heard before. Yeah. And the way that they did worship was they put a huge emphasis on spontaneous worship, which I had never done before either.
Okay.
And so they were like writing these choruses on the spot with the band and just singing these phrases over and over, which I
Mm,
felt like very powerfully in me. Kind of like the Bridge of Oceans, like it repeats and
yeah.
you just really feel it.
Yeah.
So I could feel it, but it like I was just so overstimulated and I was like, did I make a mistake? I need to get out of here. But like I had to stay. I was
Mm,
like, this is what God has for me. Like clearly I'm being called higher. So I pretty quickly like adapted and got into it and learned how to like speak in tongues. And
mm,
um I got like pretty decent at prophesying, but I have a pretty good intuition. So like kind of feeling out where people are and like, where their lives are at kind of came naturally to me. And a lot of us were pretty good at it too, because we're all like empathetic creatives. So, and we spent all this time together. So we would go on like retreats pretty much quarterly, so every couple months or so. And a lot of that time was spent in like deep worship time, like spontaneous worship. Um, we had this one like prophetic retreat in the spring, where it was just focused on getting better at prophesying. And we did like exercises,
mm.
where, gosh, there was like one game that we played. Um, and I wish I could remember the details, but we were split up into groups. There were three other girls in my group. And I think we were intentionally paired with leaders who didn't know us very well. And we were all supposed to like prophesy over each other and then like tell like feedback afterward, like, hey, this hit home, like this didn't, whatever.
Right.
It was very like, I don't know, like practiced, I guess,
Yeah. Yeah.
which was strange.
Yeah, because I think, I came from a church that, I mean, spiritual gifts were not something that was talked about anyway, because they were super conservative. But my understanding of somebody who had a prophetic gift was that it was innate in them. It wasn't something that was taught. It wasn't, a skill. It wasn't like learning the piano or learning a musical instrument. You either had it or you didn't have it.
Mm.
So it's interesting to me that it's almost like a teaching curriculum on prophecy.
Yeah, that's a good word for it. It was like a curriculum.
Yeah.
Yeah. The church that the worship school was based out of, I remember during the first conference I was at, um, one of the speakers who happened to be an elder at the church, like on the elder board, said something like, "You're not truly saved if you can't speak in tongues." And
Oh,
everyone at my church group was like so like offended at that, and like half the group left and went home early. And I remember being like, I can't speak in tongues, but I like talk with God every day. Like, what does that mean for me? So that was kind of the theology that this school was kind of based in.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, the guilt that that puts on
Oh,
people,
yeah.
like, and second guessing what is supposed to be an intimate and personal relationship with God is now suddenly, you have a checklist. If you can't do this and you can't do this, then, are you really saved? That's really manipulative,
Yeah.
realistically. Yeah.
Super manipulative. I remember I was one of the last students in my class who like received the gift of tongues.
Mm.
And I didn't want to like fake it or force it, but I definitely felt the pressure and it was like a lot of pressure. Like I
Yeah.
remember students and leaders like taking me aside pretty much every single service to pray for the gift of tongues to be given to me because I was like one of the last people to get it. Stuff like that. I just felt very like on the spot all the time. And that like it wears on you, you know, when you're on the
Yeah,
spot like that all the time.
absolutely. And was it spoken about in the sense that like you were resisting it or you weren't open to it?
It kind of was, but it was more in the sense of like you have like trauma or something
Right.
subconsciously holding you back from it. Like we want to set you free from that. So it wasn't like a guilt, like blaming type thing. It was like a, oh, poor you, like let's like free you from whatever is holding you back type of thing, which is almost
Right.
worse.
Yeah. Okay. So it's your fault, but we're not going to actually use that language. We're just going to like, it's
Yeah.
something that you don't have control over, but it's still you,
Yeah. It
essentially.
was like you are so broken that God
Yeah.
hasn't given you this thing yet that all the rest of us have.
Right. Okay. That's really messed up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was interesting.
How do you look back on that?
It's one of those things where I look back now and I'm like, I didn't know any better, you know? Like
Mm,
I really respected and looked up to these people who were like telling me these things and praying over me and wanting these specific things for me. So, of course I didn't question it. I was like, yes, like this is something that like God is waiting to give me for some reason, but his timing is perfect and his ways are higher than our ways. So, like I trust. So it was like I look back on it and I'm just sad, you know.
how old were you at this point?
I was, let's see, trying to do the math in my head. I was 22, 22 or 23.
Okay. And so, how did being in that environment impact on your sexuality and
Oh
exploring
man.
that?
So it was okay. I'm trying to like remember the timeline of things.
Oh, that's okay. I don't generally talk in timelines.
Cool. Okay.
We can jump back and go around in any way.
Yeah, so it's something I didn't think about. I was so deep in denial about my sexuality at this point that I didn't even think that I was different than anybody. I just thought like, oh, I'm so good at purity culture that I don't want to sleep with men, you know? Like I'm one of the holy
Oh,
ones.
that's great. Yeah, so
Yeah.
pure. Like it's like right
Yeah.
up there.
So
Oh,
that's all I chalked it up to, like my lack of attraction to any of these like young men in my class that like all my female classmates were going insane over. I just never felt that.
mm.
I was like, I'm just holier than all of you.
I love that that's where your brain took
I
you.
know.
That's great. I love that.
So this
Uh,
church was very homophobic, to the point where the pastor spoke a whole sermon one time, um, about his friend whose son had like a gay wedding, and they invited this pastor to come to the wedding, and he refused to go as to not affirm their sin. And he like spoke about how this is the right course of action, like if you're invited to your best friend's gay wedding or something, to not go, because then they'll get divorced and remember that you like stayed firm in your faith and are an inspiration or something like that. Like that's literally what the message was. And I was sitting there deep in my internalized homophobia, like, yes, that's correct. While at the same time, this tiny little voice inside of me was like crying, you know?
yeah.
And then so I think I just subconsciously shoved it down so far that I wasn't even aware that it was there. Meanwhile, I had a pixie cut. I dressed very like masculine, and that was like also kind of a big no-no at this church. Like I was always kind of like
Mm.
looked at like I was strange and like there was something concerning about me. I didn't fit in with any of the women at that church. But like I never asked any questions about that. I never like was introspective about that, you know. I just was like, this is what I like to wear. So yeah, it
Yeah.
wasn't until when shit really started hitting the fan in 2020 that I finally like acknowledged to myself that I was attracted to women. I still thought it was a sin at that time, and it wasn't until like
Mm.
a year after I left the church and moved away that I finally started asking myself like, is it a sin? Like, can I accept this in myself? So my entire time at that church, I wasn't even affirming to myself. So
Yeah.
yeah.
What was the realization for you that, oh, I'm not just not attracted to men, I'm attracted to women?
It was actually um TikTok. So the good old algorithm started noticing that I really liked attractive
Oh,
women.
I'm laughing because I saw a meme that was like a pastor talking about the like social media being bad because all TikTok videos are showing you are like women in
Yes.
bikinis, and we're like, mate, it's an algorithm. If you women in bikinis are coming up on your TikTok algorithm, we know
Yep. I
why.
saw that meme the other day too. I was like, yup.
Oh, so good. Okay, so it was TikTok
Yeah,
that
TikTok
helped.
was kind of the first like nudge. I kept having to like delete the app because I felt tempted. And that was when I was finally
Yeah.
like, why do I feel these feelings of attraction in my body only when I see like
Mm,
these women, you know? And it was nothing crazy, just like lesbians existing on TikTok. And I was like, I can't like tempt myself anymore. I have to delete this app. And then like I would eventually be like, I miss like the funny cat videos, re-download it. And then I would get in this cycle. And the more I was
mm,
exposed, quote unquote, to this sin, again, quote unquote, the more I felt
yeah.
myself like resonating. And so I went back and forth with myself. It was like this little war I had for like a month in the beginning of the summer of 2020. Like, is this like my sin issue? Like, what do I do with this? Like, how do I free myself from this? And I kept going back and forth with God, and I was like begging him to take it away from me. I was like, I'm doing everything right. Like, why am I struggling so hard with this? So I finally confessed to my best friend who I
Mm.
lived with at the time, and she was like just really wonderful about it, really affirming, and she was like, "Yeah, I kind of had a feeling like it's fine." She was like, "I never wanted
Oh,
to press you about it. Like I didn't want you to tell me until you were ready. So like I'm glad you told me." And then after
mm,
I told her that, she was like, I feel like we should like get ahead of the backlash we're about to get if this gets out and like tell our mentor, which is like fair in the environment we were in. Because she was also on the worship team and we played together all the time and we lived together and we were around the same age. So people would make up stories as they do. So we
mm,
met with the worship pastor separately to kind of just like tell him, hey, this is what's happening. Nothing's going on between us. We just wanted to let you know that so that like this doesn't turn into a whole big thing. And then, of course, as one does,
mm.
he went and turned it into a whole big thing. He like outed
Yeah.
me to the rest of the pastoral staff and the worship team. Yeah.
Mm,
I that he also said that the two of us had to live separately. We couldn't live together anymore. He wanted to place me with a family so that I could be like loved on and poured into, in his words. He was like, we just really want to honor you and respect you for not acting on your sin, but like we need you to like, not be tempted all the time by living with your best friend. So I felt I was like taking all this in too, because I really respected these people. And I was like, you're right. I am so broken and I need all this help because I've been doing all the right things and I'm still feeling all these feelings. Like I must be like the most sinful, awful person. Um, but like nothing was working out in terms of a new living situation because we were trying to find one. We were trying to like respect our leaders and do what they wanted us to do. but nothing was working. It was almost like the universe was like, we don't, we're not going to do this, you know? So
Yeah.
I didn't sleep for like a month straight because I was so stressed, and I had a bunch of chronic health problems at the time that like flared up really bad too. Like my body was like, just get me out of here, you know? Um, and then finally that pastor just kept pushing it more and more and more. And then finally I was like, I can't do this anymore. I don't want your help. Like, please, I don't want to play on the worship team anymore. I'm quitting my job. Just, I want to get out. So that was essentially the story. It kind of just like reached this big explosion point, um, until I had to get out. I couldn't deal with it anymore. So that's the story.
Mm. Oh my goodness. I mean, there's so much
Yeah.
wrong with that. Like so many layers aside from the bare minimum of don't ever out somebody
Right.
ever. I don't care who you are, just don't ever do that. If it ever comes to mind, just don't. It's just not okay. It's never okay. But I mean, aside from that and insinuating that you are so riddled with sin because of it, that they needed to place you with a family because you were obviously depleted of
Yeah.
love. That like there is so it's just like shame after shame after shame just being like piled on top
Yeah.
of you. Um, what was it like to be out?
It was it was unbearable at that point because I didn't even
Yeah.
accept it in myself yet. I still viewed it as a sin issue. And so I was suddenly like revealed as this shameful sinner to everyone who I thought was like close to me. And I could tell that people started treating me differently. Like they started kind of pitying me, and they
Yeah.
kept like they were really nice, but it was like a pity kind of nice. Like, oh, like let's have you over for coffee, you know? And I had a lot of those types of meetings, especially with people who used to be my leaders in worship school. So they kind of had like a mentor status in my life. I just felt
Mm,
so infantilized and so small. I didn't know how to set boundaries for myself yet, so I felt like I was like at the mercy of everyone. And it was just,
mm.
gosh, I look back on that time of my life and truly think that it is one of the most like painful times I've ever gone through. I had no agency.
Yeah. Did you feel like you were internalizing a lot of what they were
Oh,
telling you?
absolutely. Yeah. I think that was the worst part.
Yeah.
Like, if I had a sense of like, this is wrong, the way that they're treating me, the things they're telling me are not true, then I probably could have been able
Mm,
to fight for myself a little bit. Um, but
mm,
one thing I've learned about myself and now have the language for since like going to therapy and stuff is my go-to trauma response is to fawn. And so I instantly
mm,
like make myself as small as possible. I agree with everything everyone's saying, and not just like superficially, like deep down I was agreeing with everything everyone was saying because I like felt like I had to survive, you know? So yes, I was definitely internalizing it, and to this day I'm still trying to unravel the layers of shame that they kind of implanted in me.
yeah. I think a lot of people think that after leaving the church, finding an internal sense of affirmation for a queer identity is a quick process. Once you leave the environment, it just, you're not absorbing that anymore. And it is
Yeah,
anything but, right?
yeah, it takes
It is,
forever. There's a lot of layers.
yeah, absolutely. When did you start unpacking that?
It wasn't until, like I said, a year later. So, I left that church in the winter of 2020. I think it was like November. Um, I immediately got a job at Lowe's because I kind of just took any job I could find. And I've always been kind of handy. So I was like, I'm going to apply to Lowe's. That sounds kind of fun. And it was
I was so confused then because in Australia, Lowe's is like a clothes
really,
store, and I was like, handy, yeah. Lowe's is it is like it's typically a men's clothing store. It's like got workwear and
wow,
random Hawaiian
that's
t-shirts.
so interesting.
But yeah, when you said handy, I was like,
That's
whoa.
so interesting. Sorry. Okay. Lowe's
Oh,
is like a home
no.
improvement hardware store in America.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's so interesting. Wow. So yeah, I was working at Lowe's, the home improvement store, and for the first time I was in an environment with people who like don't believe the same that I do. It was like my first secular job, and I very soon discovered that people actually loved me for who I am. And I wasn't like out to them or anything.
Mm,
I never told anyone like I am gay, you know, but just like whoever I showed up as at work, I was fully accepted and people were happy to see me and I was very respected for my knowledge. Like they hired me full time in the plumbing department because I used to work in the office at a plumbing job a few years before that. So it was like
yeah.
this random thing like, oh, we just have this opening in this department, and it's definitely a male dominated topic, but I
Mm,
it wasn't an issue for me. I was like very respected for the knowledge I brought to the table by all my coworkers, and whenever a customer gave me a hard time, a coworker would always step in for me and like have my back and stuff. It was just so incredible. um and then
mm,
I was thinking about getting out of Michigan and just moving somewhere far away because my therapist said it would be really helpful for me to get out of that environment that traumatized me so badly. And I was like, yes, okay. So decided to move down to Nashville. But in the few months um, between us deciding to move and actually moving, it was just like waiting it out and very painful. And that's when I really started to think like, all these people at work love me so much for who I am, so like what do they see in me? You know, I don't see any like goodness in myself, but they do. So what's happening there, you know? So that's when I started to kind of think along those lines, like maybe I'm viewing myself incorrectly, you know. What's the truth about myself? And then so our like HR person at that Lowe's store was incredible. Her name is Nicole. She is like one of the greatest people I've ever met, and she had like this adorable pixie cut, and she was pretty out and proud that she's bisexual. And I was like, you're incredible. I just want to know everything about you. And I remember in my job interview, I told her that like I my previous job was at a church and they like really hurt me. And she was like, yeah, I
mm,
got divorced like 10 years ago and I was really involved at my church and they just completely like excommunicated me and shunned me, and like all these really close friends stopped talking to me after I got a divorce, but the guy was like abusive and I had to get away from him and stuff, but none of these people supported me. So like I really understand. And ever since that moment, like she and I had kind of an understanding. And so
mm,
this is all context for um in like the spring of 2021, it was like 3 months before we were supposed to move to Nashville. I had an absolute breakdown at work one day because I was like, I hated myself, but at the same time I like felt this disconnect on like who am I versus how do I see myself. Like all of this stuff just kind of came crashing in my brain at the same time, and I had this big breakdown and I like went to the back and stuff, and she was the one who was there, and I just kind of like
mm.
word vomited through like sobbing that like this is what happened at the church. I came out to them and they like outed me and like put all this shame onto me, and I don't really know how I feel about myself or how I feel about anyone. Like who am I attracted to? I don't even know if I can ask that question yet. Stuff like that. And she
Yeah.
like just kind of, because it was COVID, so she couldn't like hug me physically. We were kind of in the opposite sides of the office. but she was
Oh,
like, it was almost like she hugged me with her presence and her words at that moment, and she was like, you made the absolute best decision getting away from those people. Anyone who truly loves you is going to accept you however you are, and you are fully accepted here And I just like really hope
Mm.
that you're able to accept yourself. So it was like this wonderful moment. And I look back on that as a pretty pivotal moment in my view of myself and my sexuality. Because from that moment onward, I kind of viewed myself with more curiosity and openness to acceptance. Whereas before it was more like critical and like trying to like fix things and trying to like squash out the bad. Um, so
Mm.
yeah, then I moved. I was like
Yeah.
8 or 9 hours away by car from the place that all the trauma happened. So I felt very separated. I was like among all new people. I transferred to another location of the store that I worked at. So it was a very easy job transition, met all new coworkers. And there was one day, like 2 weeks in, where I had kind of made friends with this girl in my department. And she pulled me aside one day and was like, "Hey, are you gay? You kind of give me a vibe." I just like I'm pretty open with people, so I just wanted to ask you right out front. I'm sorry if
Yeah.
that like offend you. And I'm like, no, it doesn't offend me. Honestly, I think I might be gay, but I don't know. You know, we just had like a very
Yeah.
honest moment. And from that moment onward, I kind of used my job as a way to like experiment with different identities, whether it was like different
Mm.
clothes or just the way I carried myself. Just like telling people like I'm gay or like I'm bi or something, like just trying on different labels. That was huge for me. It's just kind of like trying on different outfits per se to see how it felt. And I finally
Yeah.
became more comfortable with kind of viewing myself not as heterosexual. And I was also in a
Mm.
pretty open and accepting environment, which enabled me to feel safe doing that. So that was
Mm.
like pivotal for me. And then I ended up going on one date with one of my coworkers who was a girl in like 2022. And that was like, yes, okay, I feel attracted to women. Yes,
Confirmation.
exactly. Yeah, so it was kind of through this job. Yeah.
What was it like trying on all of those labels? And what did you do about the label of
Oh
Christian?
yeah, that's a great question. Trying on the different like sexuality labels was exciting, kind of like activating, but I took baby steps. So I tried not
Mm.
to like overwhelm myself with like rejecting all of who I was all at the same time. So yeah, it was
Yeah.
like exciting. And then I felt like I could finally be myself for the first time. Um, of course, in baby steps, like I said. But as far as the label of Christian, I held on to it for a little bit. Uh, and so I was also seeing a chiropractor, and I still actually see them, but they're super Christian and they play worship music in their um, practice and stuff all the time. And I was like kind of scared to like come out. But when I posted that I was like dating a girl for the first time and it was like my official coming out post on Instagram, all of their like staff who followed me were so excited for me. And then they're like, we have to make your partner. Oh my gosh. So they're like wonderful Christians. I love them so much.
Yeah.
Um, but they were actually a big reason why I held on to the Christian label for a while because I saw
Mm.
that like you can be really affirming and wonderful um, while still being a Christian. So I was like,
Mm.
I've only ever known this like belief system. So I find safety in it and whatever. I took a small step back from it
Yeah.
where I like still identified as it, but I got rid of all the practices for a little bit when I first moved here. But then I like recommitted my life to Christ like a year into it. And then about a month after that, I like stepped back and I was like, why am I doing that? You know, like what's the real reason? Because it didn't feel genuine to me. As soon as I made that like recommitment, I immediately felt like faker, you know, like a faker version of
Yeah.
myself. And I was like, that's not the direction I want to go in anymore. I've been faking it for my entire life. Like, we're not going to do that again. And I asked myself, like, can I keep this label, this like religion, while being more authentic to myself? And at that point, like, the answer was no. So that
Mm.
was the moment that I like officially decided I wasn't going to identify as a Christian anymore. And it's not one of those things where I completely reject any of the Christian teachings and I'm like hard atheist because I'm not. I kind of believe in like a sense of connectedness, and sometimes I pray to the universe, like when I'm, especially when I'm really stressed out, because it just like really helps me like gather my thoughts and calm down. Um, I don't know. I just feel like there's something out there, but it's not something that can be defined with a label right now. And I think that's important in my deconstruction to kind of get like a more stepped back perspective, if that makes sense.
Mm, yeah. I think the freedom to not know is one of the most pivotal parts of most people's deconstruction journey, because I think most people who are part of the church were taught, always have an answer for your faith, to be able to, spout your testimony at any
Yeah.
second, because you never know whether, you're the person to lead this person to Jesus or not. And so the freedom to not know and to just be curious and to just wonder is a new experience for a
Yeah.
lot of people. Um, how do you look back on and reflect on your deconstruction journey so far?
Honestly, I feel like I've come such a long way, but at the same time, I still have a lot of work to do, you know? Like,
Mm,
I feel like for the first time, especially in the past few months, I have kind of a handle on like my body and my nervous system. And just like, it's taken me a long time to get back into my body in terms of like mindfulness and just being in touch of what I'm feeling, what I'm wanting. I used to dissociate really bad when I was a Christian and like for a couple years after because I just like my body didn't feel safe. And so I've just recently come to a point where I am not super anxious and trying to escape my body anymore. So that's been something
yeah.
I've been able to reflect on and be like, whoa, like I've really come so far. And so I'm very
Mm,
grateful for that. But at the same time, there's still so much that I want to learn and I want to dive into like different religions and see what other people believe and why they believe it. Um, Kind of like just keep diving into more history of the Christian religion too, just to see like where it
mm,
evolved and why it is the way that it is now. Stuff like that. Like there's a lot of intellectual work that I want to do. Um, and I feel like building back a relationship with my body and with trusting myself is something that might take the rest of my life, honestly.
mm,
So it's almost
yeah.
daunting when I look at it that way. But I just read Laura Anderson's book, When Religion Hurts You. And the way that she frames healing
Mm,
is like an ongoing process. It's never a finish line that you cross. Kind of like changed my perspective on that. So I'm more at peace about it now when I think about my deconstruction journey. It's just kind of what I've
mm,
been given in this life. And the fact that I'm able to like do work that helps others in such a lonely, difficult, like uprooting type of process just feels very like an honor to me. So I am very grateful that I have some sort of role in that, even if I'm myself, am still kind of early on in the process.
mm. I think it comes to David
Mm,
Hayward, the
yes.
naked pastor, comes to mind when he says that deconstruction is a way of life.
Yeah.
He'll be deconstructing until the day he dies, and I tend to agree. I don't think, which is why I sort of said, so far, because I don't think we ever stop deconstructing, because I think to stop deconstructing means that we minimize or shun that critical thinking part
Yeah.
of our
I
brain.
agree with you. Yeah. And I also think that there's so much individual work to do. Yes, like that could take a lifetime, but there's all this like collective work that needs to be done. And if you stop your
Yeah.
individual deconstruction and that critical thinking shuts off, then like what are we as a society going to do? Like we'll get stagnant again, you know? Like I think it's so important that whatever your line of work is, like you as a therapist, podcaster, me as a musician, um, whatever our thing is, it's so important for us to put our work into the world, to share our stories and to tell other people deconstructing that you're not alone, to like share resources. Like it's kind of a baby science, you know, if you want to call deconstructing a
Yeah.
science, but like the study of religious trauma and all that stuff is pretty new. And I think it is so important to for all of us to do what we can to kind of get it out there and to further the the deconstructing collectively. It's a constant work.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as of February 2023, how do you feel about your
Oh, I
sexuality?
am I am out and proud lesbian. Yeah.
Woohoo!
I live with my partner now. She is in the next room. And I feel like my life is a dream right now. And I've been struggling with my mental health a bit the past few months. And so I've had times when it's been really hard to feel thankful or hopeful. And that's just like depression
Mm,
talking. Cause I get these
mm,
glimmers of like, wow, like my life is a dream. Like I have this adorable cat now that I've always wanted a cat of my own. And I have a partner who
yeah.
I'm attracted to and who I love. And I have a therapist who is helping me so much with basically everything that I'm going through and working through. And I don't know, I have these glimmers of hope now, even in the middle of depression, where I feel like I have a life that I enjoy living and that I'm kind of crafting for myself. And I'm not saying that like my sexuality is like the center pin in all of that. But once I accepted my sexuality, I was able to start trusting myself little by little. And that led to me making choices for myself in other areas of my life. And then, you know, trying to see what I wanted in a partner and starting to date here and there. And that required an element of trusting myself. And so it all just kind of fits together, and then here I am now, and I'm trusting myself more than ever. Sure, there's ups and downs in that. But I really credit that to me finally accepting myself for the very first time back in 2021 or whenever it was.
And so, what brings you joy and peace
Mm.
in your life?
It's the little moments. Um, like a cup of
Yeah.
coffee in the morning and like a good
Mm,
book or I don't know, like a hot shower after a long day or playing one of my favorite video games. It's the little things, especially the things that don't have like a deeper meaning tied to them, you know,
mm,
because I think I spent so much of my time trying to tie like a deep purpose to everything that I did, especially working in
mm,
churches and stuff. And now it's just really really cool to be able to find such like contentment in tiny things. Um, and I
mm,
love like finding that deeper meaning in playing music, even if it's just sitting at the piano and not singing anything, but just like instrumentally making up something. And that's something that's like flowed out of me, and it's not something that I have to like beg a distant God for. So I just feel like joy is a bit more close at hand because it's in the little things and it's in like
mm.
inside of me. So that's been really, really cool.
Has your relationship with music
Oh,
shifted
yes.
over
Yes.
time?
Yeah. I actually kind of gave it up for a couple years after leaving the church. Not intentionally. It wasn't like I'm going to step away from this. It was like it was too painful to play my
Yeah.
instruments. Like I literally put my keyboard away in my closet and it stayed there for like a year. And every time I tried to get it out to play it, it just felt too painful. So it was kind of like a forced
Yeah.
hiatus. And then once I moved to Tennessee, I kind of started dabbling in it again, played instrumental music here and there. I tried to write some of that. That's what I started when I was a kid. So that's kind of how I introduced myself to it again now. And then I took another break year before last year for about 6 months. And then kind of my debut back into making music was the rewritten hymns. And so rewriting
Yeah.
the lyrics to some of my favorite songs has done a lot of healing work in me in terms of my relationship with music as well as my deconstruction. So that's been
Mm,
huge for me. And now I'm like starting to make original songs now too and actually really enjoy it. And so I would say that I'm fully back into music now and I'm fully enjoying it again. Yeah.
amazing. I love when things come full
Yeah, me too.
circle. Okay, I have been finishing all of these episodes with what would you say to someone who is fresh in their deconstruction?
I would say it's really, really hard at first, but it does get better. And it's
Mm,
so worth it because you find yourself. And there's like no greater gift than finding your truest self and like finding your inner child and loving it, you know? And
mm,
I don't know, that's been the greatest gift in my life is believing in myself truly for the first time and feeling like I have agency and personal power even just in little decisions that I make. So I would tell that person, like, you're going to find yourself eventually on this road, and it's going to be the greatest discovery you've ever made.
mm. I love that. Thanks,
Yeah.
Alanah.
Thank you so much for taking the time to hear my story.
Oh, I love it is, I say it all too often, but it is the privilege is not lost on me to hear people's stories firsthand and reading about them and listening to them is wonderful, but to hear them directly from the person themselves is always an incredible privilege for me. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Beyond the Surface. Until next time, take care, stay true to who you are, and remember, your voice and your story matters, always.